up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing encounters with demons in the night. I've said it before many times, and I will continue to say it again and again. We are at our most vulnerable when we are sleeping. Sure, there are things that we can do to bring on demonic encounters and even possessions, but they are almost always seem to be at their worst in the dead of night while we are normally lying in bed, minding our own businesses and trying to go to sleep. I have recently discussed this in one of my many videos about the jinn, and it seems, at least as far as I believe and can tell, that the darkest hours and the dead of night for us are their most active. Whether this is just the way of things or if they are purposely coming at us at our most vulnerable times, that can't be proven, but I certainly have my ideas on that one. As always, let me know what you think of these encounters in the comments below, and let's just jump right in. Our first victim is a man who we will call Ted, and who in the early 90s was living with his elderly mother in a house they shared somewhere on the East Coast in the United States. Ted explains that he seemingly all at once discovered a very deep, dark interest in demonology and all things occult, and he couldn't get enough research in on the subject. He would feverishly read about encounters and theories and everything else he can get his hands on, almost from the time he woke up until the time he went to bed at night. Eventually, he found himself blowing off work, blowing off his friends, and even bathing less. He was raised in a very religious home, and his mother was growing more and more concerned by her son's strange interests as the days went on. While Ted never went so far as to disrespect his mother when she voiced these concerns to him, he did absolutely ignore her altogether and continue to hardly ever leave his room, except to go to the local library to get more research. Remember, guys, this was the early 90s. He even lost his job eventually. He didn't understand it at the time, but definitely now he says he understands that this had become an obsession for him and that he couldn't have stopped at that point even if he had wanted to, which he definitely didn't. One day, as he sat there writing and researching all things occult, he noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere of his room. Now, a lot of us in this community are very familiar with that subtle shift, right? When you know an entity or some type of energy that's off comes into your personal space. He said it became unnaturally cold and dark, and that the energy just somehow felt heavier in the room. He said it was even harder for him to breathe. He figured maybe it was just that he hadn't opened the windows in a while and decided to finally take a break and shower. The room's atmosphere, however, stayed the same, and it even seemed to deteriorate over time. Ted figured these were all things he could live with and really didn't think much of it. However, after about a year or so of every single day, every spare moment, every single second, really, it didn't even have to be a spare moment, Ted was sitting there and researching and investigating into the occult and demonology, and he said that's when things got really scary. As he laid down for bed one night, he noticed the room was even colder than it usually was, and seemingly much darker too. There was the usual light coming in from the outside, but it somehow didn't seem to be penetrating into the room the way it normally did. After all, having lived in the same home and this same room his entire life, he was used to what was normal and what wasn't at this point. I believe he was in his mid-20s at this time. Ted stated that as he closed his eyes to go to sleep, the feeling he always felt of being watched grew to such intensity that he jumped up, expecting to see some form of intruder standing at the foot of his bed. There was no one there, or so it seemed at first. He did see a very strange circular-shaped shadow in the corner ceiling of his room that seemed to grow larger with each passing night. So this was a nightly thing. He just saw this random shadow dot in the corner of the one ceiling, and every night it was getting bigger and bigger, and that to me is like really creepy. He explained it was unusually dark and inky black, and that by a week since it had first appeared, it was now much larger and scrolled halfway across the ceiling of his room and no longer just a small dot in the corner anymore. So this thing was growing like this way over the ceiling. He experimented with moving all of the furniture all over the place all of the time because his logical mind was thinking there had to be something in this room that was casting this bizarre and somewhat creepy shadow. He kept trying to rationalize it day in and day out as the anomaly kept growing larger and larger by night, until one night something happened that made it so that he could no longer deny what it was and or what was happening to him. Ted stated, quote, "It seemed to get a bit bigger. Confused, I moved some things around in my room, figuring again something in there was casting a shadow, to no avail. The shadow stayed the same, and although I was a bit disturbed by it, I figured there was a scientific reason for it. Something outside was casting the shadow, and I would go to sleep every night like normal. Then, one night, as I turned out the light and went to bed as usual, I noticed the shadow seemed bigger than normal. I repeat, this was a very strange shadow. It seemed to be thicker than a normal shadow, almost like a puddle of black coffee. As I lay there trying to fall asleep but feeling very uncomfortable, for some reason, I began to notice that with each opening and closing of my eyes, the shadow would loom larger and appear to be seeping toward me. I was frightened, of course, yet I was intrigued. It seemed as though the longer I kept my eyes closed, the quicker it would move toward me, but it would always stop right where it was whenever I opened my eyes. At one point, the thing was at the foot of my bed. I opened my eyes to look at it, expecting it to pause there. At this point, I was becoming increasingly frightened. Instead of pausing, it began to pour toward me, and I felt the most unnatural, empty, cold, hungry evil I've ever felt in my entire life coming from it. It was then and there, I knew for sure in my heart it was a demon, and I knew that it had relation to the junk I had been studying. I pulled the blanket over my head, switched on the Christian music station, and prayed like crazy, end quote. According to Ted, these measures worked and the shadow demon thing was gone for good. He also gave up all of his research into the occult and rejoined society again. He gained employment, made peace with his friends, and moved on to have a productive and average life. What more could you ask for after going face to face with a demon, right? I mean, in this community, we should all know it's like the least we can ask for is a bit of quote unquote normalcy with the things we see, experience, feel, hear, etc. on a daily basis. I don't think Ted really understands still to this day that he was on the verge of a full-blown demonic possession. We must always remember, guys, to be careful when dealing with anything involving demonic entities and the occult in general, and we have to remember to protect ourselves. This doesn't mean that reading a few books or watching a couple of YouTube videos on the subject is going to bring you to the brink of possession, but when it becomes an obsession, as it definitely had for Ted, that's where the danger lies. Also, some people are more susceptible to things like demonic possession because of certain attachments they may have or things happening in their personal lives at the time when they may be doing the research or watching the videos or whatever it is, so please be careful. Our next encounter took place in Perth, Australia, and also to a man who was living with his mother at the time. He explained that his mother had always told him the house they lived in now had a very violent history, but refused to elaborate any further as to what this violent history was. After living in his mother's house for some time, he began to become convinced that something was watching him from the shadows in the corners of the home and that it followed him around from room to room. Either that, or there was something in each corner, in each room. He had only moved in with his mother recently, so he wasn't as used to the old creepy house as his mother had become. Our witness would constantly see things moving around in his peripheral vision, shadows again in the corners of the room. Nothing would be there when he would turn and try to see whatever it was head on. This went on for months, but he had no idea what to make of it or if there was anything at all that could be done about it. He then explained that he woke suddenly in the middle of the night to the feeling of being watched and to a bedroom that was at least 10 degrees cooler than it had been when he had gone to sleep just a couple of hours before. I'll let him explain it. Quote, I noticed that my door was wide open and I didn't remember leaving it that way because I usually don't do that. My mom was fast asleep and my sister was staying at her dad's place for the night. To my horror, I saw a small figure watching me from the entrance of my room. It looked like a dense shadow. I'm not sure quite how else to explain it. Slightly propping myself up on one elbow, I spoke out my little sister's name, thinking it was probably her. I thought maybe she had changed her mind and had been dropped off during the middle of the night. Then suddenly, the being rushed up to my bedside in the blink of an eye and moved alarmingly close to my face. Terrified, I found myself staring into a face with no discernible nose or eyes and a gaping wide mouth. Where the eyes were meant to be were dark holes, from what I could remember anyway. I'm really not too sure. My body froze in horror. Moments passed with just that creature and me in the room, gazes transfixed on each other's faces. Eventually, I was able to snap out of the frozen state my body had taken on in fright, and I flailed and kicked at the thing until it suddenly dissipated with a blood-curdling sound that reminded me of an anguished scream of some sort. I heard it out loud and deep within my head, if that makes sense. It made my hair stand on end and my heart beat alarmingly fast. To this day, I have no idea what it was. A demon of some sort? I don't know what it wanted. It was terrifying, and every so often I catch glimpses of shadow-like people/creatures from my peripheral vision. Many times I've awoken from sleep for someone calling my name, and it's usually a man or someone who sounds a lot like me. Even when I'm not asleep, I sometimes hear whoever it is calling my name, and occasionally I can feel something touching me that I cannot see, end quote. So it seems this is still happening for this witness, and if I knew him personally, I would advise him to find out what exactly the alleged quote-unquote violent history of this house is, and then act accordingly with either an exorcism or whatever it is that's needed before further advising him to get he and his mother the hell out of there. These are the types of cases that I'm always looking to report on, whether it be in my books or in these videos or even just generally, because science is working so hard to just explain away the very real phenomenon of people being attacked during sleep paralysis as some kind of trick of the mind or trick of the brain. And in some cases, that could very well be what's happening. But in thousands of cases across the world over, sorry guys, I'm not buying it. So these cases where the person is awake and thinking very coherently are the ones I really like to try and focus on when presenting my research to you guys. The next one I'm going to just let the witness / victim explain, because I could only find this quote, like this quote is the story. There was no beforehand information for context or what happened after. It was just this. The victim said, quote, "I was lying in my bed and remember sitting up and seeing 3 figures standing in my room with a dimly lit blue light coming from somewhere that was illuminating them. I don't remember what exactly they said, or rather he said, because the one in the middle was speaking directly to me. I remember his mouth opening in a very inhuman way, with the jaw extending further back than it should have been able to. Their mouth and eyes were black, not like a solid black, but a smoky type of black, a sort of gray, but you could still recognize teeth and such. I remember them saying something about coming in a few days or something. I don't remember what it was exactly. I then remember passing back out and actually waking up, and seeing some dark form dart across the room and hover directly over my bed. My bed is in a corner, so it was sitting / hovering between the wall and I, about a 4-inch gap at the time. I then felt a very, very intense sense of dread and heaviness throughout my entire fiber and being, and remember feeling this for a few minutes while I was just sitting there, my back turned to it," end quote. That one seemed more extraterrestrial to me, but again, without more info or anything before or after the encounter for context or, to give it a little more information, I can't really be sure. Our next encounter is from another person who awoke with a start in the middle of the night, but who had absolutely no grogginess or confusion as she did so. So she just woke up and was completely and immediately coherent. I believe this is our consciousness being aware that we are in extreme danger and supernaturally overriding the way our body normally works for the preservation of possibly our lives or our souls. This one happened to a woman, but when she was just a young girl of 12 years old, and here is what she described. Quote, "I woke up suddenly and fully alert. I was laying on my back, and when I opened my eyes, they met another set of eyes. Outside, sitting in the tree beyond the fence, was what I can only describe as a demon. It's fully fixed on me, and it's not moving. The eyes reminded me of a cat's, huge, with elongated pupils, yellow, and very iridescent. The body was not large, pretty lean, and dark, scaly skin. It was sitting with its legs pulled up to its chest, kind of crouched. This visual has stayed with me so vividly for my entire life. Over 20 years have passed, and I could still see it like it was right in front of me. I felt scared and threatened inside of myself. We maintained eye contact for what seemed like a very long time, and I don't remember breaking eye contact, saying anything, seeing it move. It seems kind of like I just fell back asleep at some point, but kind of doubt that that's how it really went. I just knew it wasn't a dream. It was far too real," end quote. This witness goes on to allege that all this time later, and she still passes out at the exact same time every single Christmas Eve, and has since this encounter so long ago. So she said more than 20 years ago, and apparently it happened on Christmas Eve. This is far from abnormal, though, when it comes to grown adults remembering things so incredibly vividly that happened to them decades earlier, and when they sometimes should have been far too young to remember anything at all. It's like in the realm of the supernatural, demonic, or even unexplained, our child minds are so very believing without the conditioning most of us grow up with that it's near impossible to convince an adult they're misremembering something like this, despite how long ago it happened, and also to convince a child they aren't remembering anything but a dream. Our next witness said she was about 8 or 9 when this happened while she was visiting her grandmother's house. Quote, "I was sleeping in my grandma's bed when I woke in the middle of the night cold. I looked out the bedroom door into the kitchen and saw a manly figure. I assumed it was my dad, but then I saw what I thought was long hair. It was like a shadow, black, but like outlined in a glowing white, and it had red eyes. I was scared to death and afraid it would see me. It was looking in the other direction, straight on, as if looking at or for something. I went under the covers and tried to fall asleep. The next morning, my sister told me that that same night, she felt an uncomfortable presence in the house, and then I told her what I saw. My dad, being a skeptic, said I was dreaming and tired, but man, I was wide awake. And my mom's side of the family has had numerous paranormal experiences, so at least she believed me, end quote. There are so many encounters of phenomenon just like this, as many of you have either heard about or witnessed, and I could sit here all day, every day for months on end, and still not even get out all of my own encounters with the strange and bizarre entities I've personally encountered and the things that I've seen, especially as a child, that have since terrified me and never left my mind. However, in keeping it just to instances that happen either while trying to sleep or in the middle of the night after being startled awake or otherwise suddenly woke up, everyone wants to mention sleep paralysis, and this really freaking frustrates me. I'll be discussing it a little bit in my next book, but I'm still up in the air about it because I know there are entities and energies that definitely come in the night and attack or otherwise hurt, terrorize, feed off, and traumatize us as well. It's not all science, guys. It's not all paranormal either. So sleep paralysis, or as it's now more commonly being referred to in this community, old hag syndrome, is, in its most basic explanation, when a person who is asleep wakes in an allegedly half-dreaming state with the mind very active and awake, but with the body still under the influence of sleep chemicals, which do and are still in those moments keeping us paralyzed and in a sleep or dream state. Though we aren't. It's said to be caused by a disrupted or messed up REM cycle. So REM is the dream state of sleep, and what happens is with all of this going on, we're stuck essentially in a kind of state where we are lucid and awake, but yet also in a nightmare state. Why a nightmare, not a dream, you ask? I'm not exactly sure, but I would definitely believe that it's because we are now, due to this extreme set of circumstances, aware of what's really going on around us while we're sleeping. However, scientifically, it's said to be because we are completely helpless and unable to move, and it causes us this kind of paranoid terror and hallucinations. Whatever you want to call it, sleep paralysis or something entirely different and terrifying / paranormal, it's not rare by any means. I want to say here, though, that it seems to be becoming less and less rare as the years roll by, and I don't believe in coincidence like that, or really at all. How come as the world seems to grow more and more evil, at least in my unique perspective, and in most of yours, considering you're almost all at least empathic, we are all experiencing more and more of these terrifying things happening to us in the dead of night while we're trying to sleep? If it was purely scientific, then wouldn't it have been common across the board, meaning across the ages? I don't know. This subject really aggravates me, so I'm going to move on. So the estimate right now is that up to 50% of people in the world will experience sleep paralysis at least once in their lives. Let me know below if you've never experienced it, because so far Ray is the only person I know who hasn't. The result is always absolutely traumatizing and full of horror and fear. Here is what one person reported while having what they believe to be a sleep paralysis episode. Quote, I have a few different quote-unquote sleep paralysis demons. The demon ones are the usual shadowy figure standing over me or by my bedroom door. The worst one was while I was lying on my side with my back to the door, and it felt like someone got into bed behind me, under the covers, and they put their arms around my waist. Then it felt like they were cuddling into me, and I could feel their breath on my neck. It felt like they cuddled me for about half an hour. All this time, I'm trying not to show that I'm panicking because it feels like I'm getting cuddled by a skeleton with claws. It was only about the second, maybe third time I'd had sleep paralysis, so I nearly had a heart attack when this thing feels like it's moving in closer to kiss me behind my ear. Worst of all, it whispered, quote, not yet, you're not ready yet, I'll come back when you are, end quote. To me, it sounded disappointed and excited. It felt like it was silently telling me it meant that it was coming back when I was about to die. Scared the effing poop out of me, end quote. So the mention of the sleep paralysis demon specifically here should be the answer to so many of you who have been asking me to explain the title of my up-and-coming third book, which should be out mid-September, and that I've entitled Shadow Entities Beyond the Sleep Paralysis Demon. Basically meaning, I don't really want to talk about the science. So this old hag or demonic entity is always said to be present during these episodes, and the witness I just quoted had a fairly usual encounter when it comes to such things. Most people, though, like myself, refuse to simply accept this so-called scientific explanation for something they are absolutely sure they were wide awake for. Some people weren't even sleeping when it happened, and even more have reported having been walking around at the time the encounter begins, like going to the kitchen to get a dish, right, out of the sink or whatever. This leads many, myself included, as I stated earlier in this video, to believe that sleep paralysis is a medical condition and happens as the scientists say it does, but that in more cases than not, it's actually something paranormal, demonic, supernatural, otherworldly, or even extraterrestrial that's happening while we are wide awake and then made to feel as though we were initially asleep. Does that make sense? Take this last encounter as an example and tell me if you can honestly say that sleep paralysis is a reasonable and rational explanation for it, all right? It happened while the witness says he was awake and sitting up in bed in his room. He says, quote, "I swore it was wearing like a hood even though it was shadowy and its shape was ominous, but obviously humanoid. I couldn't tell much else about its appearance because it was dark and because my reaction to fear like that is not to stare intently at what I'm looking at. I watched as the shadowy figure slowly skirted the outside of the room before it cut inside to be standing right alongside my bed in front of my face. Here's what it did. It opened the door to my room and then shut it, and then it kind of hung out near the door at the edge of the room for a hot minute. At that point, I started breathing loudly and unevenly, which was the only thing I could do to try and scare it away. Just some background, I get sleep paralysis semi-often, usually attached to naps, but never before have I experienced anything resembling this," end quote. So what do you guys think? Encounters with demons or extraterrestrials, shadow figures, or medical sleep paralysis? That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and spread the love by sharing this video. Check us out on Wednesday nights, myself and Ghost Dragon, right here on this channel from 7:15 p.m. to 11:15 p.m. doing live intuitive oracle, where I pull one card for anyone who comes in. I'll leave a link to one of the videos in the description box if you want to check it out. Come and hang out with us. That's Eastern time, okay? What's personal intuitive oracle? Well, if you'd like a personal reading from me, hit me up at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com or MoonBearOracle@gmail.com. Also, guys, the website is now officially on its way and being set up. So I'm opening my business. Gemma Jade Oracles is coming, and I can't wait to share the link to the website with you all. Also in the description box, you will find ways to donate to the channel: PayPal, Patreon, Cash App, Vero. I'll leave links. Also, my Amazon wish list gift links. All donations are greatly appreciated. They're basically what I work for right now, but that should all change when the business comes through. Yay! Guys, I love you so much. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, for watching, for sharing the content. It really does help. It means a lot to me. If you'd like to purchase my book, you will find the link in the description box for the paperback and Kindle versions of both Missing the Faith Theory and Encounters with Evil 101 Terrifying and True Stories, which you guys made a bestseller and gave me the title of best-selling author, Gemma Jade. If you'd like a signed copy, email me before you make the purchase and I will get that out to you. I will be on the Paraflix Network's show Disembodied Voices on November 6th, and I will let you guys know more about that as it comes up. Right now, that episode is streaming in podcast form, and I'm going to try to leave the link to that in the description box as well. I know I'm missing so many things, but for now, be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Never accept anything less than others being kind to you, and make sure, above all, you're kind to yourself. Always go in grace, be blessed, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.